thank you today for all who came here for the Great Ribbon Rally. This is the 8th Great Ribbon Rally that I've had. I've gone to 8 different state capitals. And really the goal here is to help young adults to not feel so isolated when they're going through cancer, and help young adults to get the needs met. There's a lot of challenges once you get cancer. You got financial, you got emotional challenges, you got relationship challenges, you got friends and family challenges that all happen and get all compounded. I'll have a number of speakers here today talk about the different needs. And one of the things that I'm working on is on the PCP, as primary care physicians, to ask new patients if they've been registered with the bone marrow registry, and if not, provide the saliva swab. And that's important because that will get people the potential chances of the bone marrow transplants that is needed to save people's lives. Sometimes that's the only thing that is needed, that's the only thing that's available for a person who has a blood cancer. And every 3 minutes someone is diagnosed with blood cancer. So please go to the website, and now the first speaker is going to be Kay from Nami, and I'll let her speak and talk about her thing. Thank you. I didn't record it, that's why.
So Rico, thank you very much for inviting me today. I work for the state office of Nami, Minnesota, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And we do 3 things at Nami. We do education, we do support, and we do advocacy. And our staff and our volunteers, we really work with a wide range of people, all the way from young children to older adults. And we have a particular interest in adolescents and young adults because mental illnesses are a young person's onset. So by age 14, 50% of people who are going to have signs and symptoms of mental illness have them by age 14. By age 24, that figure rises to 75%. So like all illnesses, it's really important to get early intervention and to get help. What is hard for those of us who are family members to know is that people wait on average about 10 years to get help for their signs and symptoms of mental illness. And if you waited 10 years for a diagnosis of cancer, chances are you would be greatly compromised or perhaps dead. So it's really important for people to get help, and the message really is that mental illness is treatable. Now, you can also, of course, develop mental illness. When he discovered that he had cancer, sometimes you also become isolated, and you very much could develop some signs and symptoms of depression, anxiety disorder, and other forms of mental illness. And so we try not to diagnose young people young. Doesn't mean we don't help them, but our brain isn't fully formed till about age 26 or 27. So when people are struggling with relationships, struggling at work, struggling at college, struggling in high school, we definitely want to provide resources so that people can be successful in those areas. And what I want to do is tell a little bit about resources with these minutes. I want to be sure that young people, for example, in high school, NAMI has a national program. We do it in Minnesota as well, called Ending the Silence. And it's about an hour program that could be in an assembly in high school, or it could be actually in a health classroom or something like that. And it really helps reduce stigma, because the main reason that people wait 10 years or more to get help for their signs and symptoms is stigma. It's not access to health care, although that can be a factor, but it really is stigma. And so we don't learn, usually in high school, in health class, very much about mental illness. Most of us that have learned what we've learned, it's been through personal experience with our families, or perhaps as an employer, helping your employees get resources that they need. 1 in 5 adults live with a mental illness, and 1 in 5 young people live with a mental illness. So that's about 20% of our population. And like all illnesses, you can have mild, you can have moderate, you can have severe. Same thing would be true for diabetes. You can have mild diabetes, moderate diabetes, really severe. You can have, mild anxiety disorders, moderate anxiety disorders, really severe. So I want to go through just a few resources so that people know where they can turn to. Our website for NAMI, Minnesota, is namihelps.org. And we just have a wide range of classes and materials that are helpful to people. We have public speakers that can come out to schools, that can come out to faith communities, that can come out to corporations, to really educate the public about mental illness. Because again, people don't get well from a major illness by themselves. That includes cancer, that includes mental illness, that includes heart disease. And so I'm going to just talk to you about some resources that we have. An example of some resources would be our children's challenging behavior classes. It's for parents.
parents that perhaps have a child that's struggling in school, in their relationships with other kids, and their relationships with their family. So it's for parents, but it's to help parents be able to help their child be successful. It's not a class about diagnosing mental illness, because we try not to do that in real young people. Another class that we offer is mental health first aid. It's taught internationally. It's taught in every state in the United States. It's an 8-hour class. It'd be like taking CPR or taking American Red Cross first aid, only it's for mental health. And I've taught adult mental health first aid for 7 years. I also teach youth mental health first aid. And that's for people who work with young people that are 13 to 18. So it's a great class for youth athletic coaches. It's a great class for parents. It's a great class for people that work at the YMCA or the YWCA. It's great for college campus staff and things like that. An example of a student book, this is for adult mental health first aid, but it's really a book that, as a participant in the class, you get to take home and you can refer to, and really a helpful class. Lots of people say that's life-changing. NAMI also has family classes, so if you have a loved one that lives with a mental illness, you want to do the best you can to support them. And so we have a 12-week class. It's free. And it's for family members, and we broadly define who family is, to be able to help family members in their family, manage an illness. We also have quite a few booklets and things that NAMI Minnesota publishes, and I chose kind of a selection of ones that are just related to youth. But we have Understanding Psychosis, and this booklet is available to read on our website, or you can actually get copies of it from NAMI. Psychosis is not a mental illness. It's a actual symptom, and so it's a break from reality. And you can have psychosis with a number of mental illnesses. But it's important when someone has a first psychotic break, which is a break from reality, for them to get help right away. Just like it is if you have the first signs and symptoms of cancer. You want to get help quickly. We also have a booklet on children's psychiatric hospitalization. Because again, if you have no experience in this area and your child needs to be hospitalized because it's a crisis, it's important to know a little bit about the hospitalization process. If your child or young adult is having a crisis, a mental health crisis, we have a booklet on mental health crises for children and young adults. We also have support groups at NAMI. We have free support groups, and they're peer-to-peer. And the support group I particularly would like to point out today is we have youth support groups. They're actually run by peers. So we train a young adult who's in recovery to lead a support group for other young adults. And we have a number of them in the metro area. We're a statewide organization, so of course we would love to have more in greater Minnesota. But to do that, we really need to have young adults who are in recovery themselves that are able to actually be trained by us then to lead support groups. So they're very helpful. They aren't exclusively for people that live with cancer and perhaps anxiety or depression, but they very much are helpful to people. And I guess one thing I should mention is the most common of the mental illnesses are anxiety disorders. They're 3 times more common than depression. Depression, is about 6.5% of the population in any one year. Anxiety disorders are about 18.6% of the population. A final resource that I'd really like to talk about is the National Institute of Mental Health. Some people know it by the acronym NIMH. And the National Institute of Mental Health has a wide range of publications also. And one series of publications that I really like are their publications that are for co-occurring disorders, such as cancer and depression. And so they have a series of brochures that they make available online at the NIMH.gov website, and they also can give quantities to people. And this one, for example, is depression and cancer. So not everyone who develops cancer develops depression, and vice versa. Not everyone who develops depression develops, not everyone who develops cancer develops depression. Not everyone who develops depression develops cancer. But our body and our mind are very much connected. So it's really important to treat the whole person. And so when someone is struggling with some signs and symptoms of depression or anxiety disorder, most of us go to our pediatrician or go to our regular doctor. And that's important, but we hope that those folks will then refer us, to mental health practitioners. And that could be licensed and marriage family counselors, that could be psychologists, that could be psychiatrists, and, other mental health professionals. There's hope for recovery. People get better, but people need to get help. And the early intervention is really important. It's a young person's onset. And then when you combine it with an illness like cancer, it's really, really important for the oncologist or the person treating you to look at the whole person, which might include disorders of the brain. Yeah, I'm not a practitioner, but I can give you some basic signs and symptoms. I think more important is to just get into the doctor. Most of us go to our family doctor, our internal medicine doctor, our pediatricians. So just know that it's changes in people. So for example, someone who pretty much sees the cup half full and now is more irritable, is having trouble sleeping, is perhaps some outbursts that you don't usually hear from that person. Perhaps their eating habits have changed. Maybe they're eating more than they normally would in the past, or maybe they're eating less. It can be either way. Could be sleeping more or could be really sleeping less. It's very individual. Those are some of the signs and symptoms of both, depression and anxiety. I should also mention that there's pretty high correlation between the two. If you live with one, like you live with depression, there's about a 50% correlation with anxiety disorder. It doesn't mean there's a cause and effect. It just means it's really a high correlation. So it's really important for young people, hopefully in a health class or in their family, to learn a little bit about not only the signs and symptoms, but to know some of those things. When you add substances on top of that, and that could be alcohol, that could be street drugs, or that could be misuse of prescription medications, that actually really causes more and more distress for someone who already lives with anxiety disorder or depression. It really just adds another factor into the brain that it is not helpful. And so it's good for kids to know that too. The other thing is that if you don't, feel yourself like yourself, it's really important to get in to see a doctor because they want to rule out other things. You can have what looks like depression and maybe you have an underactive thyroid. You could have depression and maybe it's a medication you're taking that has it as a side effect. So it's just really good to get in a good general doctor because most of us when we go to the doctor, including young people, report physical signs and symptoms. It's pretty rare for someone to go into their practitioner and say, I think I have depression. Instead, they may talk about aches and pains, trouble sleeping, tenseness in the jaw, and in actuality, it takes really a seasoned professional to ask the right questions and perhaps do besides the cancer screening, actually do a depression screening. I really think it's peer-related, and that's why I really hope young people as a group get education together because we tend not to go to our parents first, and we tend not to go into a doctor to see them at first unless we're having a sports physical or something like that. I really think peers need to be educated because we want peers to really also refer their friends to counselors at school or to encourage them to talk to their parents about it or to get them in for some safe and confidential counseling. And so I think peers are everything. And so if we can get peers educated together, because there's also, the risk of suicide. When you live with depression and other mental illnesses, there is an elevated risk of suicide. And we have suicide prevention classes because we want young people to know about that as well. Because we want them to, intervene and get help for their friends. We don't specifically, we don't have a medical staff at our state office. At our national office, we have a medical director who really vets most of our written information and things. We just know that there's high correlations with some of the illnesses and having a mental health issue. For example, I think we all think of Robin Williams a little bit. Robin Williams, before his death by suicide, he actually had been treated for substance use disorder throughout his life, recently in Minnesota before he passed away. But he also was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, and Parkinson's disease also has a high correlation with a mental illness. And so it's just really important for folks to get in to get help. Nami specifically doesn't work directly with other illnesses, but we certainly know some of the statistics about correlations.
Thank you, Rico, for having me here today. My name is Kelly Strang, and I'm here on behalf of Be the Match and also as a caregiver. I have been a caregiver to a cancer patient for nearly a decade. My husband, Brett, was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma, stage 4, in June of 2007 at the age of 27. Our son had just turned 1 at the time, and Brett went to the doctor because he had a swollen gland in his neck that after his cold, it remained swollen for a long time. After many tests and needle biopsies, doctors decided to remove the lymph node and have it tested. Days later, they called us into the office to confirm our worst nightmare. It was cancer. The next step was to have a PET scan and some more testing to stage the cancer. Again, we got the worst possible outcome. It was stage 4. I cried for days at the time, and then for the longest time I just felt numb. It felt like my world stopped and everyone else's just kept going. On the upside, the doctor told us that Hodgkin's lymphoma at the time was 96% curable. For many people with blood cancers like leukemia, lymphoma, and other life-threatening diseases, a cure does exist. Brett began his treatment with ABVD chemo in Mankato. ABVD is simply the acronym for the drugs used in the chemotherapy regimen. Initially, the cancer responded well to treatment, but it eventually stopped working. At that point, Mankato referred us to Rochester, Minnesota for treatment. The first thing we did in Rochester was ice chemo in preparation for an autologous stem cell transplant. An autologous stem cell transplant is where they harvested Brett's own stem cells and freeze them while he undergoes some very high-dose chemotherapy in the hospital for a week, and then they put the stem cells back into his body. The transplant process began on December 26, 2007. We had to live in Rochester for 5 weeks while he underwent the transplant and still maintain our house in Lake Crystal. Gas, food, and housing expenses really add up, especially when neither one of us could work during the time. We were very lucky, very blessed to have our family in our hometown and also our current church organize a fundraiser for us, so we were able to cover these costs. Many people do not have this option, and it is remarkable that Be the Match offers financial aid programs such as their transplant support assistance funds that cover things like temporary housing, food, parking, and gas. In January 2008, the actual transplant day arrived. They call this day Day 1 and your birthday because your entire immune system is killed and a new immune system begins. You even have to get all of your childhood immunizations over again. Another big day when you have a stem cell transplant or a bone marrow transplant is Day 100. This is the first day that they do a scan to see if it worked. The day 100 came in April 2008 for Brett. The stress is high and our stomach was tied in knots. And unfortunately, it showed that the lymphoma had found a way to get around the transplant. At this point, he was put on another chemo regimen while we waited for another stem cell transplant, this time with donor cells. This would be his last chance for a cure. However, we quickly learned this transplant would be much more difficult. For starters, we had to find housing in Rochester for 3 to 4 months this time. Also, there was a risk of complete rejection, death, and graft versus host disease. Graft versus host is when your body, the host, attacks the graft or the foreign cells, which can show up as a variety of different symptoms, and you never know if it's going to be temporary or permanent. It's different for everyone. So once again, we were heading into scary territory, but this was our last shot at a cure. On top of all this, we needed to find a donor. Again, we were one of the lucky ones because Brett's brother was a perfect match and he was willing to do it. Many others are not so fortunate. In fact, 70% of patients who need a transplant do not have a fully matched donor in their family. Words can't explain how difficult it is to go through or watch someone you love go through a stem cell transplant. It is physically exhausting, mentally draining, and an emotional roller coaster. I quickly learned that being a caregiver meant getting a crash course and becoming a registered nurse. I had to learn their language. I flushed his central line. I changed bandages. I managed all his many required medications, and I cleaned him up when necessary. I also had to be very meticulous with his diet to ensure he was getting enough calories and fluids. I did this while being a mother to our 2-year-old son, and many people ask why I didn't just ship off our son to his grandparents to be taken care of at the time. But what they didn't understand is that during this time, my little boy was the only thing that brought me joy. The stress is all-consuming, and Brett doesn't even remember a lot of this time because he was so heavily medicated. Sometimes I would lock myself in a bathroom and cry to relieve the stress. Or sometimes when everyone else went to bed, I would just get on my elliptical machine, put in my earbuds, and just go until I couldn't go anymore. I don't have time today to go into all the details of Brett's transplant or the bumps along the way, but I will tell you he survived. We survived. We made it to day 100 and the PET scan showed he was cancer-free. We collapsed into happy tears and felt the stress melt away. A monumental burden had just been lifted from our shoulders. However, our good fortune didn't last long. In February 2009, just 6 months after the transplant, the lymphoma was back again. The word cure was officially taken off the table. Brett's doctor presented us with a clinical study program that he wanted Brett to try if he qualified. Long story short, Brett qualified, and those pills he took for the clinical study program gave him 4.5 years in complete remission, during which time we were able to have our second child, a beautiful baby girl. And I want to bring up, too, since Nami is here speaking today, during this time when he was in remission and we had a new baby and life was good, I started to develop panic attacks. As the caregiver, I felt this weight on my chest and it felt like a heart attack, and I didn't know what was happening. And I went to the doctor and realized that because I didn't handle everything when we were going through the treatment, that I was now getting panic attacks and anxiety years later. And so I did seek out counseling through a psychiatrist and psychologist and have not had a panic attack in 2 or 3 years now, so it has been good, but it is part of the journey. Then in January 2014, that sneaky, stubborn cancer came back again with no symptoms or warning at a routine checkup. Brett underwent multiple chemotherapies, radiation, and more study drugs, and as of right now, he is in remission once again. A transplant did not give Brett his cure, but continuing cancer research has given him the gift of more time. More time to see another child be born, more time to watch his children grow, more time to live and make memories. Many of the recent treatments he was given didn't even exist when he was first diagnosed. After everything I've been through with my husband and learning about Be the Match, I joined the Be the Match registry in 2015. All I had to do was answer some questions online and then swab my cheek with a kit that they sent me in the mail. I hope that because of these few moments I took to join the registry, that someday I will have the opportunity to save a life. You too can be part of the cure. So I ask you now to please search your heart to consider how you can make a difference in the lives of patients fighting cancer and their families. Thank you. Yes, Be the Match does have programs besides financial aid, different programs that they can help caregivers with as well. It is very difficult because when we had to stay in Rochester, as the caregiver, like I mentioned, I saw everything and I remember everything. Brett doesn't remember a lot of it. And I'm in this town by myself and away from our home, and you don't know anybody. And so you feel very isolated. And it's not that people don't care. They care and they call and they write, but they feel like they don't want to intrude or things like that. So we didn't have a lot of visitors. And so it is very isolating, and it's intimidating to reach out and say, I need help. And so it is important, I think, to deal with it and handle those emotions during that time while you're going through it.
My name is Sarah DeBoard. I'm with the Colon Cancer Coalition. I'm also a stage 4 colon cancer survivor. I was diagnosed in 2011 at the age of 34. I had a 12-month-old baby and a 4-year-old preschooler at home when I got the news. Not what I expected. I thought I was experiencing postpartum symptoms, and every time I would Google them, as we so often do, a long list of possible illnesses would come up. I would click on every single one, and every time colon cancer would pop up in the list, and I would never click on it because I thought colon cancer is an old man's disease. That's clearly not what I have. So it was a great shock on November 23rd, Thanksgiving Eve of 2011, when I woke up from a colonoscopy to find out that I had a mass almost blocking my colon. I went home, I nursed my little baby, I changed his diapers, and I put him to bed, and I wondered if I was going to live long enough to see him grow up, or if I was going to live long enough to take my 4-year-old to preschool, into kindergarten, into elementary school. I'm coming up on almost 5 years of living with stage 4 cancer. I have never been in remission. I have never had any what they call NED, which would be no evidence of disease. On Sunday, 2 days ago, I just finished my 87th round of chemo. I have to do chemo to live. It's every other weekend. It's exactly what they say it is. You're sick, you're tired. You knowingly walk into a place to make yourself violently ill every other week. But my first round of chemo I tolerated pretty well. By the third round, I couldn't figure out why I was driving in the parking lot when I was going into treatment. I'd get to chemo, I'd be ready to go in, and waves of nausea would come over me, and I would start dry heaving. And I went to my oncologist very early on, and I said, why is this happening? You know, what's going on to me? And he said, it's a very real condition called anticipatory nausea. And it's because I know I'm going to go into a place and make myself sick, my body's having a psychosomatic reaction, essentially. And I thought, okay, that's great, but how can I fix it? And how can I deal with this? Because there's no way I can get through another round of chemo like this. That same day, I went to my infusion nurse and told her the exact same situation. And she kind of laughed at me and said, oh, you're having anxiety. And I thought, which I started doing, and I all of a sudden started magically walking into infusions very calm, cool and collected. And 87 rounds later, I'm still going at it. I often tell people, because I'm almost 5 years into this and because I have a long history of fighting this, when people come to me that are newly diagnosed, I often tell them so much of the battle is physical. It's putting our bodies through hell, through radiation treatment and surgery and chemo and making yourself sick and recovering. But a big part of the fight is mental. It's walking into a place knowing you're going to walk out sick. It's knowing you're going to spend every other weekend in bed feeling miserable and knocking your body down. And I always encourage people to not only be okay with this, but to talk to people and connect with people about the mental aspects of fighting a disease, about the anxiety, about the depression, because I connect with a lot of young people that have not only colon cancer, but rectal cancer and other cancers. You know, we're in the prime of life. We're raising our families. We're dealing with our careers. We're dealing with relationships, dating, marriages, and just managing a household with young children oftentimes. And it can be overwhelming, the very thought that your fight is going to interrupt that life. The life you have, the expectations you have of raising your family and building a house, or, you know, moving ahead in your career, it all of a sudden comes to a standstill. And so I often tell people they need to communicate, they need to connect, they need to find other young people that are going through the exact same thing they're going through, that understand what it's like to go out and have to buy diapers the night before treatment, or to wonder, are you going to live long enough to see your kids grow up? Are you going to be there to financially support your family? Can you pay your mortgage? Can you buy gas? Can you pay your medical bills? So finding and connecting with the young adult community is a very powerful tool within your own cancer type, or just within the cancer community itself. Like I said, I'm almost 5 years into this. I've got a very good mental grasp on it. I found my outlets. I always encourage people, you know, to not only seek help and talk to your doctor, talk to your nurses, but not be ashamed. You know, for me, I didn't grow up in a family with any mental health issues. So for me to admit I had anxiety was somewhat humiliating, but somewhat empowering as well, because it connected me with other people that also related to me. And it was okay for me to admit weakness in a time when, you know, I was going through hell. It's one thing when someone is first diagnosed, and I think any cancer patient and caregiver can relate to this, everybody's at your doorstep. Everybody's there dropping off a meal. Everybody's there offering childcare, rides. Can I get you this? They're sending care packages. Can I sit with you? Can I go to chemo with you? What can I do to help? In my situation, I'm almost 5 years into this, and I'm just as sick as I was 5 years ago. I'm still doing the exact same treatment I was 5 years ago. I'm still dealing with the exact same issues. I'm still dealing with, you know, though my kids are potty trained, I'm dealing with homework and getting kids bathed and into bed and dropped off at school and childcare and getting to work and going to work feeling tired and sick and probably not performing at my best or at my peak. Yeah, the support goes away. The panic, the initial rush, and as I put it, the fire is still brewing, but people have kind of grown bored of the fire and they've walked away. And I think, having, just because, you're not in the initial rush of diagnosis, or even if you're, cured or you're not actively dealing with treatment, you're still dealing with the side effects of cancer. And I think it's important to connect, even if you're not currently in treatment, even if you're in remission, even if you're cured, it's important to continue to connect with that community and seek out help, because there are long-term side effects of this disease that don't go away just because the disease does. So I think it's really important that the resources are there, that it's taken seriously by anybody who seeks out help, that you're looking at a lifetime side effect of having this disease, either mentally, living in fear of recurrence, financially, relationships suffer, jobs suffer. So I think that cancer isn't just a one and done. For a lot of people, I think even when cancer leaves their lives, it never truly leaves someone's life. For a lot of young people, especially with colon and rectal cancer, they deal, and this would also probably go with any type of abdominal cancer, they deal with radiation to help shrink tumors or get rid of tumors completely. And that can have profound physical side effects on anything in your reproductive region. So for a lot of young people, the side effects of cancer can kill or ruin or destroy the very thing that, young people enjoy, and that's the physical aspects, the sexual aspects of just being young and vibrant. And you're not only faced with, your life flashing before your eyes, you're facing a lifetime of, your very identity, your sexual identity being ruined by a disease. So it's how young people deal with fertility issues. For men and women, fertility often is destroyed through treatment and through radiation. Sometimes they have time to preserve fertility. A lot of times they don't. It's an emergency situation, or it's not fully discussed by their doctor, the repercussions of what their treatment is going to do. Oftentimes they don't have a choice because it's life or death, but sometimes, there are options out there to preserve fertility. So then you have to deal with, waking up one day going, life isn't going to be how I wanted it to be. I'm not going to be able to go out and get married and have kids and, have the white picket fence. I now have to approach dating, I have to approach marriage and relationships with this additional baggage of the damage that cancer's left behind. And so that can be, depressing, to say the least, for a lot of young people, to know that life expectations are not going to pan out how they had hoped because of what this disease has left behind. I think everybody's different. I'm somebody that's very half glass, actually I would say the glass is all the way full. I'm very optimistic. I'm very emotionally balanced. But I know for a lot of people, that's not the case. And they do feel like everybody abandons them. All of a sudden it's, well, why, the urgency isn't there anymore for a lot of people. So definitely they feel abandoned, left behind. A lot of times I hear from people that say people just get sick of hearing about it. Your family gets sick of hearing about the cancer, or your identity as a cancer survivor, or as somebody going through it. It's like life goes on for everybody else, even though your life is at a standstill. And that's how I often visualize it. It's like, traffic stops because there's an accident, but, the accident doesn't necessarily clear up, but everybody kind of gets used to it, and traffic starts moving along again. And a lot of times people feel isolation just because, it often feels like everybody's just tired of hearing about your cancer or listening to you, supporting it, that sort of thing.
Between the caregiver and cancer survivor and Nami, we heard a lot of important issues. And young adults dealing with cancer, it's isolating. And I didn't get the food. I was going to church and they didn't help me out. Coming from a family, my family's out in the West Coast. I was out here in the East Coast, and I did feel completely isolated. And I only had 2 friends show up at the hospital. Some people, depending on the situations, it was because I was barely been living in the state, and I had a lot of situations prior to going on within the cancer that I was already feeling isolated. I had some form of depression already going on. But cancer and young adult cancer is isolating, and young adults who deal with cancer, in the past 30 years, that age group hasn't improved on the death statistics. It's actually gotten worse. And I think part of that problem is the mental challenges and the financial challenges. I mean, there are young adults who do commit suicide dealing with cancer, and I was almost there. I had the knife in my hand, and I was looking at slicing my throat, and it was because of all the financial, the vision, the bad roommate, all the stresses that I had that was difficult, and I had to learn to go get help, the mental help. And this is why I'm doing what I'm doing, because I don't want young adults to feel isolated going through that cancer. I want them to get the help and support. And I only started this 4.5 months ago. I mean, even the church that I went to, because I had to go I became homeless and had to go to a new town, and I didn't even get, much of a help support from them, even after I've even done this whole trip. They didn't even want to give me gas money, which stunk. But that happens sometimes, and I've done with what I can, with what I've had, and I've had to go to churches along the way, ask for help with gas, and I've slept in my car a number of nights. But why I'm my plan is going over the next 2 years to every single state capital and to create some kind of plan of action, ask legislators on top of other financial legislative changes. Really, the goal at the beginning is to get young adults who deal with cancer, get the support, learn how to deal with the mental health aspect of it on top of the cancer so that they could live the fulfilling life, because that's the thing that we deserve. And young adults deserve that, and who deal with cancer and all the challenges. And so I thank you all the speakers today for coming to speak, and I thank you all for coming here today.